Hello, everyone. Welcome back to day 7 of Building a Software Factory. We are building Memo, a software factory or a product built by a software factory, 100% built on the Ona platform, running automations and letting us build this product without human code. Today, we're back with Chris. Chris joined us already last week. We're back today to discuss a little bit how we think about product management and how we augment the product manager. And this will be a very fundamental conversation around how we see the future of the software development and the product manager within the software factory. To quickly recap where we're at, we have over 207 PRs merged as of this morning, over 18,000 lines of code. We have 14 automations running. So we really see the factory is shipping code, it's building the product, it's monitoring any errors, and it's already fixing its own bugs, writing new tests. And we've really seen a lot of cool features. The question that we're looking into this week is how can we steer what the factory builds more? Yesterday, we talked about design and how to give the factory a sense of taste when it comes to the actual look and feel. And today, I guess, Chris, we're going to talk a bit more about product and product taste. So did you have time since last week to look into the product? Did you have a little bit of a walkthrough so far? And hit me with any of your thoughts so far.
I have, very superficially though. The things that I clicked on worked. Sans the login buttons, but logging in with username and password, email. Also, I was very impressed with the feeling of the editor. Like it felt very smooth, and the look and feel of the whole app is very consistent and doesn't feel AI generated. Like, it doesn't have the usual telltale signs of something that was quote unquote vibe coded, which this isn't, of course. And it's good that it also doesn't feel that way.
No, that's really good feedback. I mean, there's obviously a lot that goes into these models, building it, a lot of the harnessing around it, product spec as well. And as we said yesterday, kind of giving quite tight specs around how the product should look and should feel. Maybe if we go a little bit into the software development lifecycle, talk quickly around what we currently have and where we're gonna dive into today, right? We've touched base basically on all of these individual stages over the last few days, from the planning to building, which happens in our automations with the feature planner and the feature builder, to the review of our PRs that are then pushed, to the deployment, which happens through the CI tools and the Vercel directly, and then the operational monitoring, which we do currently with Sentry that captures any exceptions. And I think the really interesting one is the loop back from operation into planning, because naturally what we currently have in the product is all the bugs that we capture with functionality that's not working. But what we don't really have is where does the product go from here, right? And I think this is where we need to think about the product manager's role, and where we now need to think about, okay, how can we steer where the product is going? One, from our internal point of view, all the features that we would like to see, but also like looking at the users. How are the users using our product? How are the users interacting? What are the users actually using? And what are the users thinking? Is there something that we're currently missing? And I think there is quite a bit. And we had a conversation this morning, which was quite interesting. And we also had a couple of requests already on Twitter with this. How can users submit feedback? And we have basically quickly sketched out how a user feedback tool could look like. Ona is currently working on this, so this is pretty cool. So later today, you'll be able to submit feedback in the loop. But I think the conversation today, Chris, is really what is the feedback that we need to look at from a product manager point of view to steer this. I'm not sure if you have any insights on that already, but it'd be quite interesting to hear your thoughts about how you see this currently happening already at Ona and how this would translate into the software factory ideally.
Yeah, there's this arrow back. I think is a really interesting point, because it closes the loop on the whole chain. And really the way I think about this is in 3 categories. One is the quote unquote obvious path back, where you can observe the system in the way it behaves, specifically the non-functional elements, so your latencies, your error rates, the sort of standard DevOps stuff. And here you can automate a good amount of that, where, say, instead of paging a human, you page an agent or you page an automation. That is what most people think of when they look at this upgrade arrow. The other one is using product metrics. So, and this is where we venture into PM territory, where you use product metrics to understand what's used, what's not used, to the point where this whole chain essentially is subject to, say, feature flags, and the factory starts to experiment within through this chain, like where it starts to A/B test, and from that make decisions. So that is one way you can close the loop. And then the other is where users explicitly give feedback. So the A/B testing and understanding of product metrics, of course, can't really discover new things. It can only test things already in existence. So the question is, how do you discover new things? And one is, of course, our own ideas of what we would like to see in the product. But more interesting is, what would users like to see in the product? A good amount of what makes a great PM is now taste, quote unquote, as in a sense of intuition. And that intuition doesn't exist and doesn't come into being in a vacuum, but it gets created by observing different data streams. And so a question here is, can the software factory take some of that observing different data streams? What if you give it access to Twitter and Reddit and a feedback form in the product, and you have the Ona automation essentially coalesce that into a more holistic picture, giving you sort of interactive access to this intuition, almost like externalizing to some extent your intuition into the factory.
That's a really interesting thought, right? Because it kind of will automate the information flow to the product team. And ultimately, I think what you said this morning, which I thought is kind of amazing, for me as a product manager, I don't need to spend time on digging through feedback manually, thinking about what's important to the user, but actually will have the ability to get the highlights directly from the automation and from the user kind of feedback, but also obviously from the user data. I guess the question really is, like, what are the most important data streams, right? Where do we still make a decision what to prioritize? Because we might have like 4 or 5 different features come in at the same time, and some of them might make sense from a user's perspective. Some of them might make more sense from the team's perspective. And the question really becomes, okay, where do you prioritize and how do you prioritize correctly and steer your product roadmap almost?
You point to something very interesting that is not obvious, which is you still need to prioritize. So there is that assumption that, or sometimes I hear folks speak about it in those terms, is with AI, software becomes so cheap, we can build anything and everything. And eventually that's true. Like the scaling model of software very fundamentally changed. But this process that you see here is still, at the end of the day, a production process. And like any production process, it has throughput and has a cost associated with it. That cost is not zero. It's become a lot less, but it's not zero. And your throughput has gone up significantly, but it's not infinite. And so you now still need to prioritize what you put into this chain and what is worth working on. And that, to me, when we talk about software factories, that is where humans come in. Is at the beginning of the chain. It's the decision of what is worth working on, and possibly even some iteration on how should that actually look like. What is the feature we're going to build, and how does that feature look like?
And I guess this is also quite interesting, because on a bug level, you can probably prioritize quite easy. Is this a critical bug? Is this an enhancement? Is this something cosmetic, where you can say, okay, this is P1, this needs to be actioned now, and if it's less important, we'll just put it on the backlog. Whereas on a feature set, it's not really that easy to say, okay, this is critical. If we don't ship this today, our users might be stuck, or there's a security issue. So this really needs the human component, like I guess, to a point, the intuition of a good product team to really go and do this. That's quite cool.
Let me jump in on there real quick. Like the bug one is quite interesting because one, you can take a sort of quantitative approach to this and go, okay, so if users bump into this 50 times a day and you have 20 users, then yeah, this is a very significant bug. It's something you want to look into straight away. What those numbers don't tell you, and the same is true for product features, is what is the business impact of these decisions. Some of them may be obvious. Like, again, if people stub their toes into on a bug all day, every day, or you notice that the drop off in your onboarding funnel is so steep, you probably have a bug there. It's obvious you need to look at that. But there may be, like, sometimes there are these small bugs or feature requests that make a huge impact to a lighthouse customer. How does the software factory know that? So there is an element here where the connecting this back to the business, that too at this point is still a human task, a human endeavor.
Yeah, and that's I think good to hear to an extent as a human that there will be work, and I think we see really like the work of the product team shifting with the ascent of the software factory, where you don't maintain the individual code, but you maintain the roadmap, you maintain kind of almost the factory in itself. So obviously there's a shift, and I think this is also what I've seen the last few days, right? It's not like I can lean back and do nothing. There is like a lot of work around maintaining the software factory, making sure that everything runs smoothly, and we've touched base on that as well. There's a lot of optimization that you can do in these loops as well, and with the automations that we have. So I think the steering of the product itself becomes super important, and at the end of the day, it allows you to spend more time on actually thinking about product and what makes a good product, which is quite cool. Maybe what is interesting is quickly jumping into how we think about this for Memo, and the initial loop that we have designed or we're currently designing to get this up and running for Memo. And I said earlier, basically what we've done this morning, we've discussed briefly how this could look like, what tools we still want to use, what we don't want to replace. And we've kind of come to the conclusion that we want to make use of the first-party data that we can capture in the app. So this will be a user feedback directly in the app, so the user can go in and submit feedback. And just to show you kind of the workflow again, the spec was designed with Ona according to our kind of rough outline of the product that we want to build. So we want to build a user feedback tool stating the problem statement and what we ultimately want to achieve. And Ona then created us a pretty comprehensive spec. So we're going to have a feature request or bug feedback tool directly in the UI, but we'll also capture events in the app for the major functionality that we want to see and where we would expect users to go into to really be able to capture, okay, what's being used, what's not being used, is this expected or is this something unexpected, and ultimately steer our decision making. Naturally, I think you have to take some carve-outs here, because if you think of a button like delete my account, you would hopefully see that there is very little interaction with a button like that. So you always need context about what the functionality in the product does. But ultimately, once we have the spec, we then just create our issues, or we had Ona create our issues. And if you go into the GitHub, you will be able to see that Ona is just walking through the last bits and pieces. So in the next few minutes, we should have the final tool up and running. You see everything gets merged as we go along. We see a couple of closed bugs and feature requests here already. So by the end of the day, hopefully you all can start giving us feedback directly through the app and steer the product direction. We then collate all this feedback basically into a database table and run another automation on Ona to consolidate and highlight basically the graded feedback. And I think, Chris, this comes back to you. How do you prioritize? So we will still have probably something to fine tune how we actually grade and have the automation really like highlight what's more important and what's less important. And I guess there we will have the human in the loop saying and improving this over time to make sure that we actually get more accurate highlights for us and reduce the manual workload to review the volume of feedback. But this will be sent to Slack for us in this case. And then from Slack, we can actually action that. And then we've demoed the integration with Ona on Slack before. So basically will be as easy as this is a great feature request. And then directly from Slack, tag Ona to create an issue on GitHub so it gets queued and executed. And I think this is just an example of how this can work naturally, depending on the tools that you have in the stack. You can think of different integrations, different ways of capturing feedback. We obviously currently have a very lean stack. What we use for monitoring right now is Sentry, so that captures our bugs. You could obviously think of other tools like Segment, like Posttalk, that also capture session data and how users interact within the session, how they flow through the app. That gives you a lot more data to work on, naturally a lot more to analyze as well. And Chris, I guess the question here is, where do you make a cutoff? What do you prioritize when you get more and more usage data? So do you have any thinking around, what's the most important core data for you in this user feedback loop?
So obviously the qualitative feedback that users write is first and foremost the important information, followed by the context in which they write it. So I always find the journey that they've taken through the application very helpful, together with what they write. The Slack flow, and the really cool thing about running an automation here is that you don't have to just forward the information that you're given, either the data that some system collects or the feedback users give you directly. It's not about a one-for-one forwarding of this, but it's having an agent summarize and extract patterns over time. And so part of the automation is like a multi-level grouping of the data that it finds. And so, for example, within Ona, we have a product feedback channel, an internal one, where everyone within Ona can put feedback in, and that happens a lot. Like I'm really grateful for the usage that we have within Ona of Ona. And there's a number of automations that we run on that channel that, one, make sure that every piece of feedback is acted on and gets a response in return, but also a summary that seeks to compress or summarize or extract patterns over a certain time frame, say a week, a month, what is currently happening. And from that I find most interesting. Less the individual pieces are sometimes very tactical and you can act on that immediately, but the bigger picture, sort of the real, the emergence of a bigger product picture happens at longer timescales, and having agents keep track of these longer timescales is very helpful.
No, that makes total sense. The interesting part, I guess, about this is that it's all trusted feedback, how it's currently working, which helps a lot. I think also depending on the architecture, in our case, for example, anyone can sign up, anyone could give you feedback. It also becomes quite interesting how you triage this piece, and what feedback do you actually trust?
I mean, I'm not so sure it's about trust so much, because what would someone write here that they needed to question? I think it's a lot about how do you avoid building faster horses. Like the old sort of PM addendum still holds. Users, and we all know that, being users ourselves, like we don't necessarily know what we don't know, and all feature requests are commonly scoped in the context of how you reason and think about the product. So one, as a PM or as someone looking at this feedback, there's a lot of learning here. Okay, so this is how people see the product. Like you get to cross-check the mental model, but also what's the ask behind the ask? What's the question behind the question? And here I find it's a very mixed bag what agents can do. And that's then also where the human element comes in, is how can you, one of the benefits of feedback product of our own internal channel is I can reach out to anyone and everyone in that who writes in that channel. And for this kind of feedback channel that we're talking about here for Memo, this right now at least is unidirectional. There's also an interesting question of how can you make that bidirectional? Can you have an agent automatically respond in a meaningful way to get more information, so that any sort of PM-esque role then can do meaningful work here.
That's an interesting one. So like basically the PM role clearly is evolving. The question is like, how much automation will go into PMing, and where does the focus ultimately shift, right? Because again, the all this time that's kind of being spent in manually reviewing kind of data points is falling, away. So where do we see this going? Like, is it just more output? Is it better quality? Or do you have some thoughts around direction, when you think of the roles of PMs going forward?
I think it's much like any other, like we're looking to accelerate the overall SDLC. We're looking to accelerate the whole process. And that means necessarily that we accelerate also the PM role. Fundamentally, accelerating the entire SDLC is a max flow problem. And we're constrained by the least throughput station. So if planning and the input upfront has the lowest throughput, that constrains the overall process. So much like for software engineering and operations, PMs too will need to increase the rate at which they can meaningfully release work. Now, I'm not very worried about that because I have yet to meet a PM who has not been in the situation that there's much more that they wanted to do compared to what they could do, right? Like this is not the part I'm worried about, but it is important nonetheless. Like just because you can do more, the question of what you actually should you do more, is maybe as pertinent as it's ever been.
That's a good one. I guess quality versus quantity becomes a real question here, right?
Absolutely.
Because we can obviously ship a lot of features, and we'll see it over the next few days as well with the Memo and the factory shipping new ideas. But do they make sense? Do they fit into the product kind of vision, the ecosystem? Because on a wider level, just shipping new features becomes easier and easier. And with what we have today, a lot that used to be quite tough to build has become quite achievable for a lot of smaller teams even. So really, if you think about their products, is what makes sense, because their core user might start to be overwhelmed by the abilities of this product. The other questions, obviously, will be see like a lot of products just converging to offering the same feature set. And I guess the question is, does this make sense? I guess this is more a question from, when you run a software development team in a company, what do you really focus on?
Yeah, it's never been easier to feature upload, and it's never been harder to differentiate. So the often heralded end of SaaS, is somewhat true. How do you differentiate, and how do you avoid in a bit? I think the underperforming teams will be tempted to feature upload their software in a bid to create differentiation. And the really good teams will understand that in the end, it's in the relationship that you have with your users that, at least in some segments, that make you differentiated. And that sometimes means building less than more.
True. And really understanding the user's problem, right? It kind of really comes back to our loop here. If we really know what the user's pain points are, we can deliver pinpoint software rather than just offering a wide array of features that no one might use. And I guess this quite nicely ties back into observing the qualitative and the quantitative metrics of the product, of the features, of the usage, and then ultimately informing your planning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very nice. Great. Cool. I think that covers it nicely. Our automation is still working, so we're just about to launch the widget in the UI. As soon as you see this feature merged, you'll be able to go into Memo and submit feedback yourself. So please make use of that. Give us your thoughts. Give us ideas in terms of features that you would like to see, anything that didn't work for you. That will be a great feedback loop for us, and we'll touch base on that in the next few streams as well. Until then, tomorrow we will talk more about the product direction with Matt, the head of product at Ona, and how basically the product management changes apart from what we talked about today. We're back tomorrow at 5 p.m. UK, 9 a.m. Pacific time. Thanks so much for joining in. Chris, thanks so much to you for joining again. I hope this was also as useful for you as it was for me. And yeah, we'll see the Software Factory shipping some more overnight.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.